I would like to just first of all point out the obvious that it's not Maria. My name's Colin Riddington, and if you've not heard me before, I'm the chair of the Access Europe user group. And the reason why I'm here is that Maria has an unavoidable appointment, and she will be here right this very second. And hello, Maria.
Well,
Right, what perfect timing. Do you want me to carry on, Maria, or do you want to step in?
No, go ahead. I literally just got off the other appointment, so you're on a roll, and please, thank you so much again.
Right. And as you can see, normal service will be resumed very shortly. But anyway, we have not one, but two Access MVPs here this month to present to you. And very pleased to welcome Crystal Long, who is very closely involved with the Access Lunchtime group and produces, rather edits all the videos. And also UK MVP, Adrian Bell. Both of them have been MVPs for many years and both are extremely experienced developers. Crystal, you may know from her MS Access Guru site, where she has a lot of free code tools, videos, articles. She is incredibly prolific, and she's going to share some of her wonderful tools and utilities today. And Adrian has also been involved with Access for many years. He's a chief moderator at bytes.com, also as an administrator on the site, and he has been involved in part of the code used in today's demonstration, which is why he is also going to share what he's doing. Now, as you can see, there's a very busy cover slide there. There's going to be a lot to cover. Over to you, Crystal.
Thank you, Colin. And Maria, I'm so glad you're here too. Today, we're going to be talking about two free tools that I hope can really help you see what's in your Access databases. The first is just list objects from Access databases. You can give it a path, you can give it a whole drive. What it does is it loops and it just grabs information from MSys objects. So you end up with an object name and so on. And the second tool is a VBA Code Documenter. It documents code in Access as well as Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And you can turn on other options. I've put them in there. I just didn't turn them on. Other applications that also have VBA. So the first object I'm going to talk about is the simple one. Well, simple, but it's still pretty useful, I think. Very useful. In fact, I wrote this because I lost something. I wrote something really great, and then I had no idea what database it was in. So I wrote this little program that you give it a path or even a whole drive. It can be recursive, so it can also look in folders. Or it can just look in the path that you specify. Optionally, you can also count records. Both of those are checked, but you want to consider whether or not you want to keep them checked. And then you just click the OK button. And then once you do that, the bottom part of the form is how to get some reports. So first I'll just go through the relationships in this database. tpath, that's the path of the files that are being documented, has cascade delete on it. Hopefully it's not because something doesn't work right. Maybe you just ran it again and you want to delete your previous documentation because it keeps track of everything you do in tables. You can just cascade delete and it'll ripple through, delete the files, the system objects. Of course, before you do this, you want to back up your database, and then after you do this, you want to compact and repair. How to run it, you just browse to a folder or paste a folder in or put a drive letter in, and then just have a look at the two check boxes and then just click OK. On the report criteria, I'm not going to go through this right now, but I've left it in here so you can reference it. And the reports, again, I've left them in so you can reference. So now I'm actually going to open this up and do a demo of it. I've actually already run this a couple times. Pretty easy. You could just browse, pick a folder. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to pull up some things I've previously run. So I've run actually batch 1 I deleted. But when you run this, it gives it a batch number. Now, there is not a batches table. What it does is it looks in that tpath table and pulls the highest batch number and it increments it by 1. So if I choose one of these batches, this is just a criteria thing. It tells me there's 18 files in that batch, and in batch 3, there's only 5 files. I can give it an object type. I just want to see tables. So I can go to Objects Report here, and it'll just show me the tables that are in that batch. I can clear everything. What I find the most useful, and the reason why I wrote this, is because I was looking for something. So this objects query, this is what's really useful to me, because now you're thinking, okay, I wrote something, where is it? Now, all you have are the object names, you have the date it was updated. If it's a table, then you also have the number of records and the number of fields, and then it also pulls a couple other things from MSys objects and tells you the file name, the size of the file, as well as more information. Now, for my purposes, I looked at object name. And then when I found what I was looking for, then I looked at the date it was updated. Now, this is not the date the file was updated. This is the date the object was updated, which is really, really useful, because maybe you put it in more than one place and then later on you change that file, but now we want to see what's the latest time I actually changed that object. This is also good for documentation, and you can get a files report. I actually like the queries better. I did make some reports just because that's what Access does, is real good at reporting. And here on the queries, well, actually, I think I'll show you the report for this one. What it does is it shows you just a summary of each file name, and I'll make this bigger so you can see it better. Each file name and how many tables are there, how many linked tables, how many ODBC tables, because it draws that distinction. How many queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. And then if it has tables, which usually Access databases do, it tells you how many total records there are in that entire database. So I actually ran this on a whole drive, but I didn't want to share those results with you. So I just ran it on a couple other directories. When it first runs, it'll automatically set it to that batch, but you can clear, and that'll be able to show you the results of everything you've run so far. You can also give it a pattern. So for instance, if I type Northwind and then open the objects query, it shows me that I've got, well, actually a couple of these. And the reason why is because I run it a couple times on Northwind, and also I don't know why I have 3 of those though. So I ran it on 0509, May 9th, and then when Northwind got released again, I ran it on 0909, and these two kind of look the same, the 0509 and the 0909. Oh, that's it. One of these is from the starter. There's 2 versions of Northwind. There's the dev version and the starter version. So I can filter that way, or if I wanted to, I could just look for NWind. Of course, if I do NWind, I can type in the wildcards myself. Now, if I look for that, it'll just find everything that's exactly called Northwind. So I have to put the actual asterisk on the end. Now, it will check. So if you don't specify any wildcards, it automatically puts an asterisk before and after. But if you do put wildcards in there, then you need to do the whole wildcard. So here I see 3 files. So I actually analyzed the dev twice and the starter just one time. And I can clear that. So this gives you kind of a lot of flexibility, but I think just opening the objects query and filtering yourself might be a really good option. And that's kind of it in a nutshell for this. It's just really useful, I think, to find things. And then also you can create some documentation with it, you know, just a list of all the objects in a particular database or in all databases in a path or in databases as they evolved over time. Because if you keep backup files someplace and they're not zip files, because I could have made this so it went inside the zip and got the Access databases out, but I didn't. So if you do want to analyze your objects over time and see how they evolved, like maybe, you know, records in a table, how did this application change? I just create a directory with all those files, and then on each file put a version number or date time is what I use. And then just run this on the whole folder. And Adrian, you've run this, so maybe you can add some things?
I think the best I can say is it works. It just works. You've got plenty of information there. I couldn't see anything there where I felt, oh, I wish I had this information. Yeah, there's a documenter that will give you more information, which I'm sure you'll come on to shortly. For doing what you talked about and what Maria commented on earlier, you don't know where you have something. This just finds it for you.
We do have one question, Crystal and Adrian, from George. He said, speaking of time savers, how long does it take to run the tool? And obviously it must depend upon how many files or folders, but like for an average run, is it a time-consuming task?
Well, I can probably answer that because I ran it earlier today. Obviously, my computer's a whiz machine. Well, maybe not. I ran it today on a folder that I have, which holds all sorts of Access databases from all sorts of areas, you know, where people have asked me for help. I've done this, that, work, etc. So there's quite a few in there. It took 4 minutes to complete. Obviously, it opens and processes each database.
I think that's a good enough answer. It seems pretty quick for what it does.
Yeah, you know, it is
Yeah.
surprisingly quick. I mean, I ran it on my entire drive, which has thousands of databases. Oh, it took a few minutes. I'd like to say less than 10 to run, to document just literally thousands of databases. It's just a really light documentation. It gives you object names. It gives you stuff from the MSys objects table and none of the binary stuff that I don't know how to make that into English anyway. It's really quick because it's not doing a lot. It's just doing it to a lot of different databases. Or you could just do it to one database. If you just wanted a complete list of all the objects you have in a single database, you could just run it on a folder with one Access file in it. So it looks at, okay, password, it doesn't do passwords, George, but the next tool does.
Let me cover that when we look at the shift bypass.
Okay, good idea. Yeah.
To support that is actually already in there. It just doesn't get called by your code as far as I'm aware, but the routine that provides that does support giving it a password.
Right, exactly. And we're going to look at the code documenter actually right now. So the next tool we're going to talk about is the code documenter for VBA. And this documents VBA code in Access, Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And you can also add more applications in here. If you look at the code and want to add them in, you'll see where provisions have been made. I just didn't put it in here. And here's the download link. When you open up the code documenter, the number of modules in there, the number of once it's run, the number of procedures, the number of lines, the percent code, and because it also does some statistics here, it counts the number of statements, the number of comments, the number of blank lines. You can, as I said, run it on different applications. If you're running it in Access, and I'm looking over here at the right-hand part of the screen, as earlier we saw that object dates aren't the file date times, it'll analyze the earliest and the latest object dates. And so that's what the dates are listed under objects. So I can see I worked on this for 13 years, so gotta be good by now, right? There are reports you can run. You can also look at things on the menu without actually running the reports. Here are the relationships for the code documenter. Now, in this database as well, Cascade Delete is on. So if you delete records in files, then it'll just ripple through and delete the rest of the related records throughout the system. But as before, I want to caution you, if you have results you want to keep, of course, you want to back up the database first and then open it, then do your cascade deletes with all the files that you think you don't want anymore, and then do a compact and repair. How to run it? This is easy to run. Just from the menu, you choose Access, which is the default, or you can choose Excel, Word, or PowerPoint, and then browse and document the VBA code. And then you get the results and the reports. And so now I will show you. I've already run this. So when you've already run it, at the top of the form, you can just come down, and here you can see I've run it on Access databases. I've run it on Word documents. I've run it on PowerPoint files, and I've run it on Excel workbooks. So I can pull up the analysis of anything that I've already run it on. And this is an easy one. There isn't very much to my little list hotkeys add in. It only has one module, but this also, because it documents the MSys objects table, it also gets all these containers, and some things don't have anything listed. And I decided to leave those in just so you can see that they're there. But if it's a table, it'll have a T. And if it's a form, it'll have an M, a F. And if it's a module, it'll have an M. I can look at the modules in here. There's only one. It tells me how many procedures are in the module, how many lines are in the module, the number of statements, the number of comments, the number of blank lines, the number of lines that are actually code, and the percent of it that is actually code. And on procedures, I kind of have the same statistics on procedures, although here you see each procedure name. And the code lines, here's just all the code in the whole database. You can click on references. Now this is a new thing I just added. So it tells you the reference and whether or not it's broken, and its version, whether or not it's built in, and the path file. And who cares about the GOID, but it was something I could get. So here it is. And on the reports for this, I think the most useful reports are the web page report that just lists all the code in the whole database and these two things that are checked. It'll generate a BAS or a CLS file for each module, and it doesn't do tempvars. That could be added, I guess. But if the declarations are in the code, then it will document them, and you could look for tempvar. And it also gets a TXT file for each procedure if you like. Now, I use the Everything Search tool. So I really like being able to make these files from a database so that I can then use everything to find the code. The About page has where you can download this tool, and also, well, it wouldn't even work in VBA 7 if it wasn't for Peter Cole. Thank you, Peter. Is Peter here? Adrian?
I am here.
Oh, yes, there he is.
Hey, Peter.
With grandchildren in the background, so a little bit noisy.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So Peter updated this because I originally think I wrote it back in 2007, and then in 2012 I put it on the web, and it was for 32-bit access. And Peter updated it, thank you, to run in VBA 7, so it can run in 32 or 64-bit. And here's the link to his page where you can get his free viewer and scanner. I love the viewer. If you have a database that doesn't have too many changes that need to be made for the API declarations, the viewer is just awesome. He gives you the syntax that you need to put in, and then what you have to do is figure out, are there any other procedures, or are there any procedures that need the data types of the variables changed? And maybe, Peter, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sorry, could you repeat that for me? I was just shutting the door to keep the grandchildren quiet.
So your viewer tool shows the API declarations.
Yeah.
And or type or constants, whatever they look at. But then what is it that that does not do? Like, they copy and paste from what you've given them, but what else then needs to be done?
Right. You then need to go into each procedure where that call is, that declaration function is used, and adjust the parameters, because there will be some which have been changed to long PTR, which is the one which switches between 32 and 64-bit. In every case, you'll need to change the dim. What I do in my auto updater is to actually prefix something which is a long pointer with LPT, so you can then see which ones are different. If you're doing it manually, you have to swap between the declaration, see which one's a long PTR, and then go down into the code, look at where the function is called, see which of those parameters are then long PTR, and then go back to the dim statement in that function, or in the global declarations, or wherever that variable is defined, and change it from long to long PTR. You mentioned the scanner. I've got a new version of the scanner coming out in a couple of weeks' time, which will scan a collection of databases, single database, folder, all databases on a drive or from a pre-selected list. And that will give you a mass of information about how many declarations there are in your database, how many of those are already updated. They have PTR safe in. An assortment of other things that you need to know whether your code is going to run in 64-bit, because you've got obviously different databases that you might be connected to which may or may not have 64-bit versions available. You've got things where you have CreateObject, which may be pointing at something which has been custom made, and you have references which may or may not have a 64-bit version available too. So the scanner will give you all of that information on one or thousands of databases. I've got somebody with 8,400 databases to look at, so doing it one at a time is not really an option. The scanner is available free.
Thank you so much, Peter. I also just wanted to add, when you go to this link and you put that in your shopping cart or whatever it is, the site that you have to go to, you need to put an email address in there, but that is for Peter only. It doesn't go anywhere else. That's just for Peter so that he can let you know if there's updates available. And if you just have one or two databases and you don't have a whole lot of stuff, well, I just have this one database, but this one database had a whole lot of stuff. And first I tried Peter's viewer, and then I just thought, Peter, please do it for me. And he did. Thank you.
Crystal, I've got a question in the thing for Peter. So I wanted to do it before we move on. There's a question for you, Peter. Are your grandchildren coders in training?
Certainly one of them is, yes.
That was a light-hearted one, obviously, but Phil Foulis wanted to know that. So I'm glad we got that one in. Crystal.
Yes.
Would you like to continue?
Yes. And so also under the downloads in this database also is Wayne Phillips File Property Viewer, which I absolutely love. And I have it pinned to my taskbar because you can open it up. It's an Access database. You can open it up and just browse to any file and see all of its metadata. Really, really wonderful tool. And then there's links to videos kind of relating to the other things. And then what really, really under articles, Chip Pearson, who was really a awesome programmer, Excel MVP, and a site is loyally maintained by others. This article is what really got me started on this code documenter. So right now I pulled up a simple one. Now let me pull up, I actually ran the code documenter on itself. So I'll pull up the analysis for that. And here I see a lot more objects. Well, actually there aren't. I should pull up the analyzer. That'll show even more, but I think this is enough. So here you see all the object names again, when they were created, when they were modified, and this is according to the MSys objects table, which for the most part, I think is it is a much better date than the file date, the single file date time. So this gives you a really good idea. Then you can look at the different modules, the different procedures. Here again, we have code lines, references, reports. Now, what I really like too is being able to filter. So for instance, if I click on module and I filter for a module, then if I filter for a procedure, it'll just be all the procedures in that module. But what if I want to see, well, actually, I think maybe I will use my analyzer as a demo on this because I have some interesting things happening here. So on the procedures, if I come down to the form procedures, the ones that start, and I could have typed an F to get here quicker, but I see that on the form before insert, the minimum lines is 5, the maximum lines is 29, and 3 of these are duplicated. So this is kind of interesting. I could just filter it. I'll pick something easier. I'll go to the form loads. So there's 4 of them that are duplicated. But if I pick form load and then I go to code lines, it only shows me all the form load code. So each time a new procedure starts, we have conditional formatting going on here, so you can see it in orange. For each of the code lines, it marks whether or not it's code. So you see these blank lines aren't marked as code. It marks whether or not the whole thing is a comment. Now, this doesn't mark if there's a comment on the end. This next one right here has a comment on the end, but it didn't mark that as a comment because it's also got executable stuff on it. And it also marks whether or not it's a new statement, because I use line continuation a lot. I only want to count it if it's like the first line of a new statement. So this is how the statements are counted. I could also filter for a phrase. Let me reset this. Let's say I want to find everything with debug in it. Maybe I put a bunch of debug lines in there and I don't know where they are anymore. So I'll filter for debug. Right now, I have an option of seeing procedures or just the individual lines with debug, but I have procedures picked so I can see the whole procedure where I have used debug somewhere in the procedure. So I can decide, do I want to keep those? Do I want to take them out? There's really a lot more to this and a lot about it. And I actually did make some things not visible because I didn't remember what they did anymore. But let me just pull up something that's not an Access database. Like I said, this can also analyze Word documents, PowerPoint files. So here I just pulled up one of my normal documents for Word, or normal DTM, and actually maybe not a good one. Let me pull up something more recent. All right, so this has more of the Word code that I've written recently. I've been getting into a lot of Word automation, all the modules and the procedures. Here, again, I have all the code lines. I can filter for phrases.
Someone did ask earlier, and I think you spotted this and half answered it, but I don't think you quite got the gist of the question. What is user defined? With a tempvars as a question afterwards, as in, is it user defined, the question? I think that would be that. I think the answer to that, but you clarify if I get this wrong, is that when you create a table yourself, it's user defined, but MSys blah de blah tables are all system designed. Can you clarify that? Can you make that clear?
The question about tempvars, you can look for tempvar in code lines and find all the places where the code defines it, assuming it's defined by code. Now, this doesn't analyze macros. And I guess I should have put a link to my tool to convert all the macros in a database to code, because I actually do have code to do that. So the code documenter can document it, because a lot of times important stuff you need to do is in macros. There are two types of system tables. Usys is user system, and I sometimes do preface things with Usys if I don't want them to show up. But I found in the tools that I'm releasing, because I did do some Usys tables in some of the earlier tools I released, and people just weren't finding those things. And so I kind of quit using Usys for the stuff I release, but I do use it for things that I write for other people, because Usys always is hidden. So I'll do like a Usys underscore T or a Usys underscore Q, or, whatever kind of an object it is, just so that that will be hidden. And MSys, of course, is the Microsoft system tables.
Right, I just wanted to get a bit more of an answer on that one. That's good. The last question then is, will the code document work on non-Microsoft products that have VBA embedded in them?
That's a really good question. Who asked that?
Let me see. I didn't.
Phil?
Phil Phillips.
Oh, well, Phil, I would love it if you would run the code documenter on it and see if it works. It depends, I guess, on how the project is set up, if it can be recognized. You might also have to just make sure you can get prompted for it, because the other options that are not enabled in the main menu, I think mainly it's because I didn't put the file extensions in there for it to find those kinds of files. So really all you have to do is get your file in there that has the VBA project. And yeah, I'd love it if you have something like that to see if the code documenter works.
Can I jump in there, Crystal? It's Peter.
Sure.
You'll need to create object on a different type, because at the moment you'll be opening Access, Excel, Word, or PowerPoint. If you're wanting to open an AutoCAD database, you'd need to create object on that Autodesk database to get at the code behind it.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, excellent point.
Let me just see if I can interpret that. Does that mean that unless the code includes the not the extension, but the way to open that particular file, then it won't be supported no matter how many?
I think what Peter is saying is my code does a create object and it opens a specific file type.
Exactly.
And you have to be able to specify the application and create objects. So Phil, you're going to just have to try that. I'd love to hear about your success or not, and just even trying it, just let me know what happens.
Crystal, I would add, if you find any limitations or errors, let her know. It could be that that's actually quite easy to fix if it doesn't do it already. Is that fair to say, Crystal?
Right, either me or Peter.
Yes.
on that matter.
Yep.
Because I think Peter's more knowledgeable and when it comes to that than I am, but let us both know.
Sure.
This is just the first one I talked about, list objects, loop access files. The second one is the code documenter. In case you want to document your SQL for queries, record sources, row sources, there's a tool that I didn't talk about that you might find really useful. Actually, it's an add-in, but there's instructions on the page on how to install it. I also have a free analyzer. Actually, it's not just me. Lots of people contributed to this, including Adrian, which you might find useful. And Colin has also a professional database analyzer pro that kind of combines what my analyzer does and my code documenter does. Of course, he does it a little differently, but it's all in one place and you can get license for it. So if your company requires that, then this might be a good consideration for you. And then just about me and Adrian. Adrian, let me just jump into what happens when you go to this browse and document code. When you go to browse file, I'll just go to the definition for that. There's all kinds of different file types that you can get into. And if your application is Access, then it just runs through these various different filters. Let me just go right to Adrian's code here. This is really, really quite clever. And all these things at the top, this is what the 32-bit code was. This is what Peter corrected it to be. Adrian, to do a little step through of what this code does. I found it really, really interesting, although anytime I'm going to ask Adrian to help me with it again because I don't understand it on the level that he does. So you want to talk about what this is doing, Adrian?
Yes, please. Would you mind unsharing your screen because I want to share mine?
Oh, not at all.
You'll see here that this is pretty much exactly the same code that Crystal was just looking at, but it's made a little bit bigger to be a little bit easier for people to read if they've got it on in a small window. Most of that comment I will ignore for now. Crystal has already looked at these declarations, which Peter has very kindly updated. The commented ones are the ones as they were before. When you run Peter's tool, that's what it'll do. It will comment out the original and create a new one for you, which is adjusted to work with 64-bit. So again, thank you.
When Peter runs Peter's tool.
Fair dues.
When you run the free stuff, you got to do everything yourself, but he did it for me.
Indeed, indeed. Right. Okay. So private conshift as integer equals &10. We're going to get a little bit into binary here because the operating system is Windows that we're calling to do this shift. So essentially, when you open Access, you can open Access straight into a database, or you can open Access, then open a database. When you open the database, if you hold the Shift key down, which is known as the bypass key, then the automatic on-start actions won't take place. Now, obviously, most of us here know that there is a way of blocking that, but we won't be covering that today. This is for those databases which do have auto startup stuff, and we don't want it to run because we're not running the database, we're just looking at it as information. That one is get keyboard state. So get keyboard state, Windows tells you the state of the keyboard. And what that does is it gives you an integer with bits set depending on certain keys that are held down various things. So that is what that does, and we'll be using all this. I won't look at this by definition because we'll cover them as we use them. Now, public function OpenBypass. Now, someone asked earlier if you could open with a password. And this procedure, it's a function procedure, allows you to pass a password. And if you do, it will use that password. It will pass it anyway, so if it's blank, it will open a file if it needs no password. It also allows you to specify, just as when you open if I just bring your attention, if you can look down here, that is the actual code that you would normally use within Access to open the current database. So it's the main database for that version of Access, even though you can open multiple others as databases, you can open one and one only at a time as current database. What this also passes is the name of the database itself, which generally speaking is a full path, but doesn't have to be. It could be relative to your current path, etc., etc. Okay, so on error, process error, fine. Couple of dimensions. So there's a couple of long variables. Now, I should explain BYT A byte keys. This is a byte array. Some of you will have dealt with arrays, some of you not. It's not very common, but this is a 256 byte array of byte values, starting with index 0 to 255. And this is what is returned by the operating system call. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is what stores that so that we can refer to it later after it's been changed. Okay, so the first thing we do, probably obvious, is we're going to create a new Access application. So when you open the Documenter, that's in Access. It runs as the current database. All of the work and its documenting, its grabbing of the data is done in a separate instance of Access, which has its own current database. So we have a current database in Access version A and a separate version of Access, which will have your data database. And when I say data database, the one that's going to be scanned. Then we say with OpenBypass, I expect most of you are aware of what with does. It means that whenever you have a reference which doesn't specify an object, that object, the OpenBypass or whatever you have in the with, is considered to be at the start. So that would be equivalent to OpenBypass.visible. when you use create objects like this, it will create the object, but it will leave it invisible. And for our purposes, for the shift bypass, that won't work. It needs to be visible for it to work. Now you can make it visible very quickly while it works, does this, and then set it invisible afterwards, should you want to. That's your call. But for this part to work, it does need to be visible. Okay. Lung this equals, right, okay. In the API calls, the Windows API calls, it uses process IDs. And we've got two processes here, you'll have noticed. We've got the original access process, and we've got a newly created access process, which is OpenBypass. So I want to convert the access window ID. You'll recognize this value. If not, it's the name of the window ID that internal to Access. So Access has a window ID, but it's not the process ID. Windows API recognizes this and has a procedure here that allows you to convert that to the actual process ID. And I store that as lung this. Nomenclature should be fairly straightforward. This is the original Access application, and that is the application which we've just created to get our database information. By val 0, that is actually, it's going to be a pointer value. We want the 0 value. We don't want a pointer to that. If you do by ref, you would actually pass a pointer to that 0. That's no good. We actually have to have the value 0 in there. Okay, and we do the same for the dot. Now, I'll just do this for the first one. This is OpenBypass dot H1 Access app. So this is the other Access applications window ID that gets converted to a process ID, and that is then lung that. Now, for this to work, one of the things that you may all have discovered is that it's all very well pressing the shift key, but you've got to do it at the right time, and it's got to be recognized as pertaining to that actual application. Now, the code is running in this application, but we want that application to be affected by what we're going to call the shift key. We obviously don't have an operator sitting there pressing the shift key, but we're going to make it look to the operating system, to Windows, like the shift key is down. Before we can make that relevant to that process, we have to attach them. So we're going to say, call attach thread input, lung this, lung that, true. And that allows Windows to attach those and thus recognize our keyboard state as being pertinent to the application we've just opened. Okay, so call set foreground window as .hwind access app. We're not using the lung that anymore, the process ID. This one works with the window ID, and we're going to set that to be the foreground window, because that's what obviously we need for the shift to work. And we're going to set the focus to that window, and then we're going to get the current keyboard state. This is a list of 256 bytes. Each one pertains to a different key status, different key. I say a different key. One thing that is important to notice, I'm just going to very briefly switch to the top up here, because what I didn't explain earlier with this line is that the keyboard status that Windows provides has a status for the left shift, a separate status for the right shift, but also a general concept of shift. So there is one of the items there that we'll be using which just says shift is depressed. Doesn't say which one it is, and it doesn't care, just that shift is depressed. Obviously, if you depress left or right shift, it will also set shift. but we're going to go straight to the horse's mouth and work with just the shift, the general shift. So back to where we were. We're going to get the keyboard state and we're going to save it. So bytevar equals the array element that matches conshift. Conshift is actually 16 or hex 10. So that particular one is what we're interested in keeping. So bytevar, this byte variable, stores that because we need to set it back afterwards. We're going to pretend that shift key has been set, but when we're finished, we want to set it back to what it was before, which is almost certainly shift key hasn't been set. Okay. And now we're going to set that particular position in the array to ampersand H80. Now, for those that haven't dealt much in binary, that would be the equivalent to, because it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 1, 2, 8. So, and in hex, that's 80. So that is the value that we need to set it to, and that's what we're going to set it to there in our code. So we get the existing state, we save, and then change one particular value in there, and then we set the keyboard state. And then we call the open current database. Now, as mentioned before, we pass not just the file name, but also whether it's exclusive or whether it's got a password. So when you call this, if you give it a password, it'll pass that on to the open current database. Notice this is the with OpenBypass, so it's called dot open current database. It's opening the current database in the object which is OpenBypass, which is the other access application object. Okay, as soon as that's finished, then we set in the array the one value that we changed, we set it back to the one we saved, bytvar, and then we say call set keyboard state and pass the whole lot. One thing I didn't expressly explain is that when you pass an array to an array, a Windows API call, if you do it in VBA, it's fine. But when you're doing it to a Windows API call, what you want is the address of the first element, because they're all contiguous. What is the address where you have your array? And the way we can do that is by saying array element 0, because that's always the address of the whole array is also the address of the first element in the array, because it starts there. And that's how we get around giving that information to the Windows API. So we pass that as 0. We're not actually saying just pass one element. We're saying pass the whole array, but the way it looks to us in VBA is we just pass the first element. Once that's done, we detach the other thread, the other process, and we do that by attaching it false. It's not very obvious, obviously. So we call attach thread, these two threads, false. What that does is it terminates the attachment between those two threads, and then we're done. Or obviously, you've got the error handling, which is all very straightforward. But I don't think anyone's interested in going into that in detail. Generally speaking, it doesn't cause many errors. I hope that makes sense. I will stay around for any questions if I can, but we've hit time, so I'll pass over to Crystal.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. See why I didn't want to explain all that? Adrian does such a better job. And I will stay around too. As long as anybody has questions. Maria, thank you very much. Maria, do you want to say anything else?
Just that our November meeting is for those in the U.S., the week after Thanksgiving. It's
What's the date?
What? The 28th of November.
Ah, well,
Yeah,
I can offer basics of classes in VBA.
Let's chat afterwards and finalize that. I'd love to hear more stuff like that particular thing that you just explained. Actually, I thought that was fascinating. That's way deeper in the window handling than I've ever done. And I know there's probably uses for that kind of thing. So not that you have to do that. The classes may be a very good discussion. Anyway.
Excellent job of that OpenBypass, Adrian. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
I feel there's probably a lot of people that were sort of tickled by it, but because there's so much there, doing it in such a short, I didn't really allow time for people to ask questions about individual, because like yours, Maria, the ampersand H80, yes, that's not something most people deal with every day. So I'm happy to explain that. There was too much there to also get into more detail at the time.
So
Yep.
Maria asked a question, Adrian. What is ampersand H80?
Oh, right, yeah. I thought I'd explain that, but I'll explain it in more detail now. If we're all happy with time, I'll show it on my screen, actually, if I may. It'll be a bit easier. So we're back here, ampersand H80. Ampersand H, in fact, says that what is following is hexadecimal. That would be valid because it's a hexadecimal number. So it's not 80, it's essentially 128. On here, if I say hex 128, what you'll see there is 80, because that is the hexadecimal. Now, in binary, that is 10000000. And the lovely thing about hexadecimal, why it's used so heavily, is that each hexadecimal digit is 4 binary digits. So it makes it easier converting from binary to hexadecimal. You've got the 0 there. The second 0 after the 8 is that. And that first nibble, as we call it, is 8, because you've got each, as in decimal, you've got units, tens, hundreds, thousands. In binary, you have units, 2s, 4s, 8s. So it goes up in powers of whatever base you're using. So that would be working from the right, that is. So 0 units, 0 2s, 0 4s, and 1 8. So in decimal, that's 8. And in hexadecimal, that's 8. Now, if that were hex 8F, which would be written 8F, which is an 8, a 4, which is 12, a 2, 14, and a 1, 15, which in hexadecimal is F. Does that make clear what you were asking about, Maria?
A little bit, but so you're sending a character essentially to the other window?
He wants to know why you're sending it, Adrian.
And that's a P, is that right? I mean, why are you sending that P?
8, hang on, where am I looking? Well, I need to find the ampersand 80. 80, here we go.
But then you set the keyboard state to that. And why do you set the keyboard state to P or whatever?
That isn't a P. It is the value 80 in hex, or 128. That's because the leftmost bit, or bit 7, in that byte, it tells you is shift on or off. So if that was 0, there would be no shift down.
But what you're really doing is opening it with auto start. I know you even say that in the comments. I'm sorry. I'm not reading comments. I'm just reading code. Essentially automatically opening it, holding the shift down in that application.
Yes, because when Access sits there, says, is the shift key down? What it does, it goes to Windows. It doesn't actually monitor the physical keyboard. Has no way of doing that. What it does is ask the operating system, Windows, what is the status of all my keys? And it gets the same thing here. It gets an array of, what did we say? How many there were there? 256 bytes. And it knows to look at the 16th one of those and look at bit 7 in that. And if it's 1, Access will treat that as shift key down. So what we're doing is we're setting the value that Windows passes to Access.
Makes sense. Thank you for the clarity on that. Sorry if I was dense and didn't read
No,
it.
every question that you ask or that anyone else asks is a question that someone else didn't understand as well. It's extremely rare that you'll be confused about something, but no one else is.
Yeah. So
That's true.
if you're to a stopping point, Colin has also asked, show your simpler code to open with Shift Bypass. But if you have a link to it someplace, I'm happy to have you, post the link.
I also just want to say thank you, Colin, for stepping in and
Totally.
being there and being here.
Doing a fine job as usual, Colin.
Thank you. A very brief job, though. That was brilliant timing, Maria. It's as different an approach as possible. I was fascinated hearing Adrian's explanation of that code because I've seen it before, and I have to say, until he explained it, I didn't fully understand it, but I think I do now. But as I say, mine's as different as it could be.
Can I just check before I stop sharing? Does anyone else have any questions or would like anything else gone into in more detail? Deafening silence.
Join Access Lunchtime on Tuesday, the 28th of November for Adrian Bell's presentation on the basics of classes in VBA. This will be a great starting point for any interested in taking classwork further. The Access Pacific Group will have a presentation in January 2024 on the 4th with Kent Gurrell showing more advanced uses of classes.
All right. Well, thanks to both of our presenters and our guest host here today, and to everyone else for joining us. It was great to get together and learn some new things and see some cool tools. Crystal, I already downloaded your documenter and I used it to find out how many lines of code in this one particular database that someone's wanting to upgrade to a different platform, like a web platform. And I thought my best guess was I had 50,000 lines of code, and I have about 3 times that amount. So it really was useful. It'll be 3 times the price for someone else to do that. So
well, I'm glad you found it useful. Did you look at the number of comment and blank lines?
Yes, had 82% comments. And so, and I probably have 20% unused code forms and that kind of stuff, so I was able to give a much more accurate figure after that. That was great.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you next time or maybe at one of the other user group sessions later this week.
Thank you.